Welcome to this edition of Diligence Inside Australia's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter and I'll be your host for today's show. We're filming here at the Governance Institute of Australia's National Conference, and it's a collection of company secretaries and directors who are coming together to get their arms around changes in both governance and what's happening in the boardroom. So today's show, we're going to talk about age diversity and how younger directors are impacting boards. And joining me for this is somebody who's been involved in this group, and that's Paul Smith, who's the co-founder and CEO of Future Directors Institute. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, TK.
So maybe the best place for us to start is just if you can educate our audience just a little bit on what the Future Directors Institute is.
Yeah, so Future Directors' sort of tagline is democratize leadership. As governance become more stymied, we saw that companies and organisations were having to become the drivers of change, but in order to actually affect significant change, you need the right people sitting in the right places, and that for us is the boardroom. So we started, in a sense, trying to help people to create that future boardroom which is driving change. And part of that is the board composition and who's in the boardroom. And we felt that boards were lacking that generational diversity, that sort of blend of the wisdom of experience with the wisdom of inexperience, you could say. And so we basically put in place ways to encourage younger people, board young, as well as youth, to start thinking about governance as a way to actually get involved and make a difference. So what we're trying to do is actually help people become what we define as a future director. So it's someone that's empowered to help create change, but is also empowering people around them. They're an influence in the boardroom, and that's what a future director is.
So as I travel around the globe and meet with boards and sort of get the feel for what's going on, there's no question that there's a trend in some countries to bring younger board members onto the board. Yeah. That's been driven by digital transformation, cyber, data security, digital marketing, all the things that are changing the way that business is changing. And what's interesting about it is many of the sitting directors haven't had to deal with that in their careers in the past. So the solution and why investors are pushing for some age diversity and stratification of age is so that there can be people in the room that are more familiar with where companies need to go and can contribute to that conversation. That's right. I see that trend probably more in, say, the US and the UK than I have so far in my visits with Australian companies. So in your experience, am I accurate?
You are accurate, yeah. We're a little bit more conservative down here. In terms of, especially from a governance perspective. It's not to say that it's not happening, and I'd certainly say there's a recognition that it's required, but generational diversity has sort of been, to a certain degree, in terms of recruitment and board composition, has sort of been lumped with gender diversity. So you're getting younger women joining boards, but we're talking about board young, so people in their 40s, that's seen as board young. Yeah. So PwC define, board, the threshold between young and old, I suppose, is 50, whereas we tend to work with people anywhere from 20 through to their 40s as well. Yeah. But yeah, the trend is accelerating in the less risk-averse boardrooms like the non-profits and communities. But within the corporate space, yes, there's definitely a lagger. They're lagging behind, and there's also, in a lot of places, they're not willing to accept that younger people potentially have a place in the boardroom. I've heard plenty of stories and spoken to plenty of people who, unfortunately, when they think about young people, they think about their kids. And they said, well, my kid wouldn't be ready for the boardroom, therefore nobody is. It's that sort of bred general stereotyping, unfortunately. However, for every one story you get negatively looking at young people in the boardroom, there's plenty more who are actually already doing it and are having a major impact.
Yeah, there was some directors shared with me that they didn't think that younger people would want to be on a board, and I've seen no incidents of that. I mean, if somebody has the opportunity now, that's a great segue into my next question, which is, it's not unusual in the States that when they bring a young person on board, that they are 20 to 25 years younger than anyone sitting in the boardroom. So we happen to be founders of something called the Next Gen Board Leaders, which I know you're familiar with because you helped us with some surveys. Anyway, this is directors that sit on, are currently on public boards in their 30s and 40s. And wonderful examples of people that sit on the International Coke Board at age 36 and are contributors. It's a fascinating group to sit with. But all of them, to a person, said that the onboarding process and the being accepted into sort of the gathering and between meetings, that all that has to significantly change for a younger person. Okay, so when you talk to your group, are you also preparing them for that reality that,
It's all about making sure that people going in with their eyes wide open. There's a belief often when you're, as a younger person, that you're walking into a boardroom that also that board knows exactly what they're doing all the time. And I think the cold hard reality is, most boards don't have an effective onboarding process, especially for younger board directors who will require access to some training, but also that expectations management about what they really are, what is their role, what are they expected to bring to the table, and what are they expected to learn. But I think the one thing I want people to change their mindset around, and I talk to a lot of senior directors saying, yes, we will mentor our younger directors. I want them to see them as mentors, so that cross-mentoring, whereby I'm being mentored by a younger person across all the things that I'm not aware of. And I think that's what's changing for me now, is this boards tend to be where I've learned everything I need to now sit on a board, where we're moving to this lifetime of learning because the world's changing so fast. And I think that's some of the attitude and aptitudes that younger people are bringing in, is that adaptability to change, which I think a lot of older board directors that haven't experienced that, they need to lean into that and sort of be coached and mentored by their younger counterparts.
So there are some challenges. For example, a lot of these younger people are what I'll call mid-career. Okay, so they may still manage a large division of a company, but they are they don't have quite the flexibility, for example, that a CEO would have to say, okay, I'm going to just leave work and take care of this issue or that issue. There's also things which I found very interesting, like maternity leave that might be necessary for a board, which I'm sure has not been discussed very often. And then there's all the issues of, again, knowing when to speak up, feeling confident enough to, feel that you're one of those. And then the last thing I'll point out is, a lot of directors think that this younger director is just bringing like a digital skill or whatever, and it frustrates these younger directors because they say, no, I can bring operation skills, I can bring all the skills that you have, maybe not as long, but I'm more current than this. So they don't want to be seen as a single topic director.
Yes.
Same experience you're having?
Exactly the same experience. Just going back to your first point, time is a big barrier for people. For most people that we work with, the boardroom is I suppose you could call a side hustle, in that sort of startup language. Yeah. And so it takes a certain person who sees it as a priority and can make the time, but also they are probably senior enough in terms of their role, not age, whereby they can actually negotiate with their employer to actually sort of incorporate that into their life. Assuming obviously it's going to be non-competing. But that's again why a lot of younger people end up first and foremost in non-profits, not because they can't get into the corporate world, because of the time element, and also non-profits tend to meet outside of work hours, etc. So there's just way more of them. So that's a big challenge. Finding your voice and knowing when to speak up, that's just really about just making sure that you're building relationships with people around you all the time, and that's just building your confidence. But I go back to the whole thing I said about the wisdom of experience within experience. The whole point of bringing in younger people, it's not so much about those single issue technical skills, it's about that cognitive, the way people look at the world. I would look at the world potentially very differently than you. and someone who is 10 years younger than me in their early 30s, they would look at the world very differently than that. And that's what you want. You want people bringing together, looking at a problem from lots of different angles. And whilst the younger people may not have the experience to identify, say, certain risks outside a certain thing, but you're not putting that expectation on them. You're putting the expectation they will have some very key strategic insights. They will identify certain types of risks that you would never even think of, especially sort of in a digital or reputational sort of space. Plus, if you think about it, you know, the workforce is predominantly Gen X and millennials now, the consumer base, and you know, we've got the massive multi-trillion-dollar transfer of wealth going on between baby boomers and, you know, their offspring. And so you think about the three key stakeholders right there, you know, where's their representation?
Well, that's great insight into this topic, and I think, you know, because of things like artificial intelligence and blockchain and things like that, I think it's only going to be necessary that younger directors, you know, populate the boardroom. So, Paul, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us.
My pleasure.
And that will conclude this edition of Diligence Inside Australia's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again soon with another important topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.